Well, hello everyone. My name's Jenny and I head up the WIRE's projects and grants team. I'm joined on this call today by my colleague Tegan, who is often the one behind the emails answering your questions, and she'll be helping with that at the end of this call. I would like to start by acknowledging the Darug and Guringai peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm calling in from. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. WIRES is Australia's largest wildlife rescue organisation, and we have been rescuing and caring for sick, injured and orphaned wildlife for over 35 years. Our mission is to actively rehabilitate and preserve Australian wildlife and inspire others to do the same. WIRES operates a dedicated wildlife rescue office, assisting wildlife and the community across Australia 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, providing rescue advice and assistance for over 130,000 animals annually, as well as providing full-time mobile wildlife emergency responders operating across Greater Sydney, Southeast Queensland and Tasmania. We currently provide significant national support for hundreds of projects to assist with wildlife rescue and rehabilitation across Australia, and work nationally with strategic partners to support the long-term recovery of wildlife habitat and the long-term preservation of native species in the wild. And that's where this program comes into things. A couple of quick housekeeping rules. I don't think that you can put your microphone off mute, but if you can, just leave it on mute. This presentation goes for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then there's question and answer. So it's not, I'm conscious of everyone's time. So it shouldn't be too long, and then we can ask questions at the end. There is a Q&A function that you can ask questions as you go, and we'll answer them at the end. If there's something that's really sort of pressing, like I said, you can use that raise hand function. So this webinar has been put together to give you a bit more information about the WIRES National Grants Program. I've been in the grant space for a while, and I know that it can be tricky navigating the grants process in general. So there's a few tips and tricks in this to help understand grants in general from a funder's perspective, and how to write a great application for any grant. And then there'll be some information that's WIRES grant specific. If you have questions about anything else WIRES related that's not related to this grant program, please contact info@wires.org.au. We'll put that in the chat at the end so that the team can direct your inquiry. All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully that's working for everyone, and you can all see it. So I've done a little introduction. Like I said, we'll do some grant writing 101, and then I'll talk specifically about our National Grants Program. So as I said, WIRES is Australia's largest wildlife rescue organisation, and I've said all that. So in grant writing, it is the exception to get funded, not the rule. Now, it might seem a little funny to start here, but I just really want to get the point across that globally, the need is so great that almost all competitive grant programs are oversubscribed, and therefore some applicants are bound to miss out. The average grant success rate globally is around 20%, but it's very dependent on the grant that you're applying for. There are some that have success rates as low as 3%, and we do try and keep ours around the 20%, but it really depends each year on how many applications we get. So, and even the best grant writers and projects are not always successful. As an example, on the same day that molecular biologist Carol Greider won a Nobel Prize in 2009, she also learnt that her recently submitted grant proposal had just been rejected. So even Nobel Prize winners get rejected for grants. So just because your project isn't funded doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't fundable. And please don't take it personally. So grants are different from other sources of funding like donations and gifts. And this is whether we're talking about government, grants, trusts, foundations, corporates, charities. They're managed differently to other funding opportunities, and it's important to recognise this difference. Grants are seen as an investment by the funder. Like I said, globally, the need for funding, particularly across the environmental sector, is massive, and funding is always finite. Grants are awarded to make a difference. So it's important to focus on this when developing your proposal. What will be different once your project is complete? You need to demonstrate the value for money in your proposal to make this an attractive investment. And on that note, many grants, it's the reason many grants won't support the general operations of businesses because it's not the investment, it's not the return on investment that funders are looking for. Grants are also about relationships. You are entering a contract with another entity where both have responsibilities. So build the relationships and be professional. Funders want to work with positive, like-minded organisations and individuals. They want to know who you are, how you align with them, and who else you collaborate. Even if you're not successful this time around, positive and negative interactions will be remembered by funders. So it's important to maintain that professional interaction. Capacity. Funders want to know that you have the experience, the resources, and the capacity to complete this project on time and on budget. And this is hard with time poor, busy people that are doing amazing things. So it's important to show that not only you have the skills and experience, you have the time, the resources, the ability to complete this project on time. And impact. Funding is about impact. So how do you quantify this? Make sure you focus on outcomes and impact as well as outputs and activities. So when you're thinking about the proposal you want to put forward for a grant application, as part of your project planning, I always go through who, what, why, where, when, and how. So who are you? Who are the other stakeholders in this project? Who is needed to complete the project and who benefits from it or what? What is the primary purpose of your application or project? What do you need? Materials, permissions, insurances, and what are your expected outcomes? Why? Why is this project required? Why should the funder care? And why are you the right person or organisation to take on this project? Where is a little bit easier. Where's the project going to take place and when is your project going to take place? And how? How are you going to achieve your goals? What are you going to do? And the big question, how much will it cost? From a funder's perspective, it's quite obvious to see the projects that have been built around the opportunity offered that miraculously make it up to sort of 50,000 or 100,000. And it's important to make sure that the need is there and the project matches the need. So before you write, start early. Writing a strong application takes time and usually requires multiple edits. So give yourself long enough. Make sure you do your research on the grant. So read the guidelines if they have them, the key dates, the eligibility criteria. Look at the mission of the organisation, look at what they're hoping to achieve, and ask yourself, is this the right grant for you? And are you the right fit for the funder? And the answer is not always going to be yes. I know it's very easy to need funding and try and fit a square peg into a round hole, but again, that's fairly obvious if your values don't align with the funder. If you're not really sure whether it's the right project for the grant program or for the funder, start with a soft pitch. Reach out to them via email or give them a call. They're usually pretty happy to listen to people's ideas before, like while the applications are open. So just give someone a call, say, here's what I'm trying to do, here's why it's important, here's a little bit about me and the people I'm collaborating with. Do you think it's a project that this organisation would fund? And then make sure you check the application process, because if it's via technology, as ours is, if you encounter issues with the technology, you want to give yourself time to overcome these, so you're not trying to log in at 4:54 for a 5 p.m. deadline, because things will go wrong. So your proposal, be concise. You need to tell a story and get the assessors and the funders involved in what you're doing, but be concise. It's not War and Peace. Make sure you can back up any statements you make with facts and figures. It can't just be entirely on passion. Ensure that you actually answer the questions asked. That may seem really obvious, but it's very easy to answer the questions you think you're asked, or the ones that you want to answer. Make sure you use positive language. Organisations are providing funding for a solution, not a problem. Be the conduit to the solution. You can identify the problem, but then talk about what you're going to do, how you're going to solve things. Make sure you tailor your application. I'm very aware that grant writing takes time and can be repetitive, but avoid the trap of too much copy and paste. Make sure you are looking at those guidelines and eligibility criteria, and you're tailoring your application to the opportunity. Complete accurately and on time. And think of the assessors. Quite often in grant programs such as this one, the assessment panels are voluntary, and they put a lot of time into reading 50 to 100 applications, and they're doing that around full-time jobs and families, and because they want to help as well. So have a think about, if they're looking at 50 similar applications, how are you going to make things really clear to them and easy to understand, so that they're not sort of struggling? And also, how do you stand out from all those applications? So that leads into top 10 tips for grant writing. So think of your grant application or your proposal as a job application. It's competitive, only some people will be successful. How do you sort of stand out? Make sure your grammar and spelling are correct, and then make sure you sell yourself. So what's your unique selling point? Why should we choose you? Avoid assumptions. It's really easy in an industry where there's jargon and there's non-relationships between groups and individuals, that it can be easy to make assumptions about what people might know about your group or your organisation or you as an individual. If you don't know who the assessment panel is and where they're coming from, it's really important to avoid assumptions. So outline everything. If you work closely with another group, and most people know that, but not everyone, then make sure you include that in your proposal. Try not to use too much jargon. Assume that your assessors are educated, usually in the area that they're assessing, but maybe not in your very specific area. And saying that, be specific. So that's the same. Make sure you're really clear on numbers and outcomes and timelines, and provide evidence that backs that up. So whether that's quotes if you're asking for equipment, or letters of support if you say that you're working with partners and collaborators. It's a good idea to show your application to someone who's not even in the sector, an objective third party. I know myself, when I've written applications and submissions, that I've looked at the same page multiple times, and I don't notice sort of basic grammar mistakes, or I'm not really staying on topic. So it's always good, after you've spent a lot of time on something, to show your application to a third party. Like I said before, the last minute is not your friend. If you leave things to the last minute, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. The technology won't work. you'll not get something in time. So give yourself the timeline of at least 48 hours before the closing date for the grant, so that you're working on that timeline the whole way through, and that's your hard deadline. And do what you say you're going to do with the project, with any relationship that you build. So the relationship doesn't end if you get the funding. You need to continue that relationship. You need to report on your project on time and on budget, or communicate with the funder if that's not going to happen. We know that things go wrong, particularly in the environmental world. If we just look at the last, I want to say 18 months, but it's actually more like 3 years. There's been fire, flood, famine, plague, everything that could happen has happened. And we're aware that that happens, but if something happens like that, that's out of your control, that has impacted your project, the earlier you let a funder know, the more likely they'll be empathetic, sympathetic to what you're going through, and work out a new plan of action. If we don't hear from you, and then when we start sending emails saying your report's due and we're not getting any answers, it's usually pretty obvious what's going on. So we do want to work with you to make your project work. And like I said before, not now does not mean not ever. So if you are not successful, if you put an application in and you're not successful, that doesn't mean that you won't ever be successful. It may not even mean that you won't ever be successful in that particular program. It's always a good idea to seek feedback. But sometimes it's just that 20 projects could be funded and yours was the 21st. And unfortunately, that's what happens in some cases. And that might be the feedback that you get. But if there are actual changes that you can make to your project, it is always helpful to get feedback so you can resubmit for another opportunity. And like I said, always be professional, whether you're successful or unsuccessful. Maintain professional and positive relationships with funding bodies. So that's grants in general across the board. Most funders are pretty consistent with those expectations and requirements. But now we're going to move on to our grants program. So the WISE National Grants Program is designed to support best practice wildlife rescue and rehabilitation, native species recovery projects, and increase emergency preparedness. There are 4 objectives: to build capacity and capability for the Australian wildlife rescue and rehabilitation sector, improve emergency preparedness and response capabilities to assist wildlife, preserving species and their habitat through projects leading to long-term positive outcomes for native wildlife, and raise community awareness and inspire broader community involvement in supporting Australian wildlife rescue, rehabilitation, and preservation. There are 4 tiers of funding available. Tier 1 is for individually licensed wildlife rescuers and carers. Tier 2 is for licensed wildlife rescue and rehabilitation organisations. Tier 3 is for large-scale wildlife rescue and rehabilitation organisations or projects that help multiple species or multiple groups, environmental NGOs and community groups. And Tier 4 is for large habitat scale, landscape scale projects with multi-partner collaborations. We have 3 special grants. We had 2 last year, we've got 3 this year, and they honour 3 WISE legends. So we have the Mikla Lewis OAM Habitat Restoration and Enhancement Grant. So Mikla was the founder of WISE, and when she founded WISE in 1986, little did she envisage that 35 years later, the organisation would have expanded all across the country. She decided to form WISE with the help of a small group of people from various environmental organisations, following a report of an injured ibis in Sydney's Hyde Park, when none of the existing animal welfare bodies had either the jurisdiction or the resources to implement a rescue. Mikla's foresight and knowledge led to the rescue and rehabilitation of thousands of native animals. To this day, she continues to be a dedicated WISE volunteer. We've got the Helen George Mammal Grant. From the moment WISE was founded, Helen's expertise in wildlife rescue and care was invaluable. Helen's involvement with WISE as a carer, trainer, and mentor lasted more than 30 years until she passed in 2017. When Wise received its very first call for a wombat in distress, it was Helen's advice that was sought. Over the years, Helen developed and delivered mammal training courses and trained hundreds of volunteers. This grant is a tribute to the invaluable support and expertise Helen provided to Wise and is a nod to her particular love of wombats, macropods, and bats. And finally, we have the Pat Connors Avian Grant. Pat was a long-term member of Wise. He developed our first ever rescue and rehabilitation database and call recording system and supported it for well over a decade. His contribution enabled Wise to provide rescue advice and assistance for more than 1.5 million animals. Pat sadly passed away in December 2020, and the grant is to honour Pat's outstanding contribution and his passion for birds. These are the key dates. So you're all here because you know that the applications are open. So they close on the 19th of August. That's Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And then the other key dates are available on the website and in the guidelines. This is also on the website, and this is a little infographic of the process we go through in our grant program. So we're at number 1 at the moment. The grant opportunity is open. As I said, we encourage you to check the guidelines, your eligibility criteria, and the key dates. Attend an online information session, or tick, you're doing that, or watch it online for those people watching the recording, and then submit your application accurately and on time. Once the grant opportunity closes, my team will go through and check eligibility on all the applications, and those eligible applications will go through to assessment. And then we notify applicants of outcomes and disperse funding, and then all the fun starts with the project. And then like with many projects, depending on the length of the project, there'll either be one final report or a progress report and a final report. So like I said, in Tier 1 and 2, it's individually licensed wildlife carers and rescuers and licensed rescue and rehab organisations. And this is for things like rescue and care equipment, authorised training courses that will increase emergency preparedness in your group or as an individual, increase equipment that will increase your emergency preparedness, medical supplies and non-prescription medication for animals, affected animals in care, and things like expensive disinfectants and all those things that we know that cost money for carers, and also urgent repairs or upgrades to existing enclosures and facilities. For Tier 3 and 4, like I said, it's for larger wildlife rescue and rehab projects, environmental NGOs, and then Tier 4 is the multi-partner collaborations. So this is for projects that build rescue and rehabilitation capacity at significant scale, habitat restoration projects, those that improve emergency preparedness, risk mitigation and emergency response, and community education, citizen science, community engagement campaigns. So how to apply? If you haven't already, if you click on the Apply Now button on our website, it brings you to this grant platform, and I recommend you copying down this address, because it's the one that you'll need to log into to check if you're successful, to submit all your reports if you are successful, etc. So you'll need to remember this website. But basically, the first time you come here, you go to the register section in the middle, first name, last name, email, password, and then there's 2 boxes that you'll need to tick that say I have read and agreed to the terms and conditions, and also that you agree to receive notifications and communication from Wise about your application. So that box is not a spammy, you're going to get everything from Wise. That is purely about your application. And if you don't tick that box and you are successful, you won't get the notification that you're successful, and same with your reporting, you just won't get those notifications. So make sure when you're setting up your account, you tick those 2 boxes. If you have already set up an account, that is possible to change it inside your account as well. So then, like I said, once applications close, We'll conduct an eligibility check. Applications that are incomplete or ineligible will not progress to the next stage. Those that are will be collated according to the funding tiers that you've applied for, and these collated applications will be assessed by the WISE technical review panel. And then successful and unsuccessful applicants will be notified in writing. Unsuccessful applicants will be notified a little bit later than successful. Once all the successful grantees have executed contracts, that's when we'll let everyone else know, because there is a chance that contracts won't go through, and then the next people will move up in the line. So I don't want to email you and say you're unsuccessful and then a week later email you back to say that you are. So if you're a successful applicant, we'd love you to share the good news that you got a grant. So in the guidelines, there's information about how to talk about us on social media. And if you share on socials, we can spread the word as well for you. Make sure you stay in touch. We love, there's formal reporting, but yeah, we love hearing your stories as you go along. If you have any amazing wins, make sure you tag us or tell us about it. Be sure to take photos as you go, before photos, during photos, after photos, depending on the project, and keep all your receipts. We will be asking for receipts at the end, and it's no good telling us that they got thrown out at the end. This is for our auditing. If we get audited, so it's very important that we have that information. And like I said earlier, let us know if anything changes. If you have a flood or a fire or a illness, anything that holds up your project, the earlier you can let us know, the better, and we can work with you to change the timeline. If you are unsuccessful, please don't be disheartened. Remember, 20% success rate. So that means 80% are not getting grants. So it's definitely not that, yeah. And like I said, seek feedback. Not every grant program will allow you to seek feedback, but if they do, I would recommend that, because that's the way that you can get better and learn. Remain professional. There's no good going to social media and complaining if you didn't, because there'll be other grant programs and other relationships with funding organisations, and it doesn't do to be unprofessional in a disappointed state. And I encourage you to try again, whether it's a different organisation with a similar program or the same organisation. So our grant program will be running again next year. So if you're unsuccessful this year, we do allow you to request feedback. So I encourage you to get feedback, make the edits and try again. I will say that with the caveat that different assessment panels will come up with slightly different scoring. We do have consistent assessment criteria, but it's assessed by humans. There is a level of subjectivity in any grant assessment process. So you could put the same application in and get a different result in any given year or with any different given panel. And again, if you're successful, like I said, we love informal updates. There is the formal reporting that you're required to send us. There is an opportunity for us to attend site visits or planting days or openings of enclosures, and we'd love to get out of the office. I still feel like the office is not my natural habitat. And then make sure when you're finishing up your project that you've done everything that you said you were going to do. You've provided receipts and photos and final reports, and then share the story of your project and your success, and again share that with us, so that and keep sharing it with us. We'd love to see how it continues in time. So these are a few resources that are also really helpful for generic grant writing, and so you can Google these, and there's others as well, but these are quite good for Australian grants. And that's it for the presentation. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. So I'm also going to stop the recording at this point, and then I'll open it up for questions if there are any. And if anyone has questions following this that they think about it after I log off, then please email grants@wires.org.au. That's on our website, and one of the team will get back to you and answer. So I will stop the recording now.